Okay, perfect. Sorry. Still early in the morning here.
Thanks, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you all today.
You bet.
I'm going to be starting off to talk about how my perspective has actually developed over time, um, as well as talking about then into difference and intersectionality, some mindset shifts that have happened as well during this conversation, and how to start moving towards belonging. So it started, as I mentioned, when I founded my company Amplinate. Um, I started it with my husband and co-founder. It's Marcello, if you see him on the slide here, um, and he is Brazilian. And part of founding the company was actually doing research internationally. Was like what I was really interested in doing because I really enjoyed doing cross-cultural and international research at Microsoft and thought I want to just do this specifically. So that's part of like how we started. And then I also tried to create the most diverse company that I can and have people across all of the different continents actually. So I'm based in Paris, France. If you see the window, it looks dark because it is dark now. We have a team in Seattle. We also have a team in Sao Paulo and in Florianopolis in Brazil. And we also have a small team in the Philippines. So we grew intentionally and we grew globally. And over the time that I have been doing research internationally, we have done research both on DEI specific topics such as social inclusion, accessibility, abuse, privacy, security, accommodation, seeking help, and health and wellness. And then we've also been doing research with different diverse groups. For example, neurodiversity or a disabled group or sexually diverse groups or gender identity groups, etc. So part of it, so there's the topics and also the groups of the people that we've been doing this work with. And then we started to do a whole bunch of lit review, and then wrote a report on reframing diversity and inclusive design, which I will share and you can all read it. Oh,
Yeah.
question. I sent a couple things that are could be like pre-reading. Did anyone do any of the pre-reading?
You guys did? You really did, Kevin? All right, Kevin
And I
did.
watched half the video, but I think it was long.
He said that he watched half of the
It was
video.
long.
It's a little long, but he did the reading.
Yeah, well, yes, that was a panel that I was on, and actually with a good friend of mine who's non-binary, Ender. If you watch the video, um, that's been really fun. So as I mentioned, have been on a lot of panels and have been speaking at different DEI conferences where Tiziana and I actually met. So we tried to pull all of the knowledge of the industry that's out there right now, as well as our own perspective, and put it into this report. So this is kind of like my frame of reference and where I'm coming from. And I guess also part of like why I talk about this. I actually talk about DEI and diversity because I'm queer and I want like queer experiences to be better in the world. But that extends to every other type of diversity group. So let's start with difference and intersectionality. Appearances are not what they seem. And I want to start with the general metaphor of what diversity is. And we talk about in the USA, when I was a kid, we always talked about it as a melting pot. The idea that we have all these people from all these different cultures and different skin colors and backgrounds and religions, and we all come together and it melts together. And that is not really a helpful metaphor because the idea that we somehow blend together and become all the same isn't really true. And a more accurate metaphor is the mosaic. And in the mosaic, we actually have different tiles that are all different colors and different materials, and they happen to be next to each other. And if we were to take a metaphor for what diversity is, diversity isn't just us all saying that we're together and being different. It's actually acknowledging the difference. And by having differences of opinion, differences in skin color, in religion, in language, in culture next to each other. That's what diversity is. So I'd like to continue this metaphor of not being melted together, but acknowledging and accepting that we are different. And a big starting place for any kind of DEI and diversity conversation is to acknowledge our differences. And there are lots of different facets of diversity. You can look at structural and environmental facets, sociocultural and individual facets. Now, in the individual, this is kind of where physical ability and sexuality and gender and all of these things, age, all come into this kind of individual. But it's important to also note that there are systemic things with society and culture and environment that impact our abilities and our diversity, as well as the sociocultural in terms of nationality, religion, language, and family status. So I'm not going to get into all of these, but I'm going to pick on a few kind of general themes that apply. So one of the angles that you can look at, and you can take any one of these angles, but one of the angles that you can take a look at is actually looking at people that are over 65. And in the report, a big part of what we're arguing for is that the more that you understand diversity and all of the different facets of diversity, the more that you can start looking at product development, product design and development, and impacting your product in a positive way that includes more people. And by understanding who the people are that use your products, then you have a better opportunity to design products that actually meet the needs of the people that are using them. And so part of the conversation around diversity is also around audience and who are the people that that are using a product that's being designed. Now, I know this isn't necessarily the focus of this this lecture, but it's important to contextualize how where I'm coming from here. So if we're looking at like people over 65, that's 15% of the US population. And it's 23% of the Italian population. It's 28% of the Japanese population. This is one lens that you can start using to look at evaluating what diversity can look like. Here's some more statistics, data points. 15% of the world population will have a disability in their lifetime. So if you are writing something, if you are building a product and it isn't accessible to people with disabilities, then you are cutting out part of the population. They can't even access it. And that becomes important because there are kind of two arguments for diversity and inclusion in the business world. The first one is the ethical argument, which is that everyone should have access to technology that includes them and or that does not exclude them. And then there's also the kind of justice, which we'll get to later. And then the other argument is really around ROI and how we can actually appeal to a broader population and thus sell more of your product. And business people really like that one. So that's why some of these stats here are kind of important. So 11% identify other than heterosexual globally. And there's a lot of diversity within that 11% as well, which we'll get to. 4 out of 10 Americans identify as a person of color, and tech companies reap 10 to 16 billion per year when they start committing to accessibility. And so again, part of where I'm coming from here is looking at like, there's a big number of people that are outside of the average. And by understanding them, we're actually doing a better thing for humans. Which brings us to this idea of intersectional identity. And I think that what's important here is that we explore the complexities of humanity and how we are different, not looking at putting us into boxes and looking at how we're all the same. Again, it's this idea of acknowledging difference as a way to appreciate complexity and intersectionality. Now, intersectionality can be defined in a few different ways. And I've heard most people kind of define it in a way of multifaceted. And some other people also define intersectionality mostly in the context of power and struggle. Intersectionality suggests that people have unique experiences based on the combination of their identities, and that it is impossible to understand discrimination and oppression by considering one singular identity, especially given that institutions have used identity to discriminate against some and privilege others. So part of the conversation around intersectionality also is a conversation around power, discrimination, and privilege. And here are just some of the examples of intersectional identities. You can have a different educational level as someone else. You can have a different gender identity or race and ethnicity, class, sexual orientation, disability. And we're all a mixture of all of these things. While I am a white cisgendered male, and those are typically in positions of power and oppression, depending. I'm also queer. And because I'm queer, I have this like the sexual orientation of not privilege. And I think that what's interesting is that if we put people in boxes, we're like, oh, you're this. It doesn't acknowledge that that person may have come from another country, speaks another language. You can't necessarily see their sexual orientation. You can't necessarily see if they have a disability. Some yes, some no. And when we make assumptions about people, we're putting them in the box. And it's really about acknowledging that assumptions and biases are there, and we might have some general idea of who a person is by looking at them, but we're always going to be wrong. And I'll talk about more of this about in the mindset section. So let's talk some more about some queer identities. And I got this next, here's a gender identity spectrum where we can look at like male, female, genderqueer, and asexual. But we actually can dig a little bit deeper and look at it in a more complex way. I'm actually going to jump to this one and then I'll come back. So gender identity is how you in your head think about yourself. And I got this from, it's pronounced metrosexual.com. And this is the genderbread person. So I highly recommend taking a look at this. You can download the PDF. The link is here. You can also just go to it's pronounced metrosexual.com. So gender identity is about how you in your head think about yourself. It's the chemistry that composes you and how you interpret what that means. Gender expression is how you demonstrate your gender based on traditional gender roles through the way that you act, dress, behave, and interact with others. Then you have your biological sex, which is specifically around biology and organs. And then you have your sexual orientation, which is who you're physically, spiritually, and emotionally attracted to. Now, I think sometimes a lot of these things get conflated. And it's also part of what's interesting if we look at the way that this impacts business. Because as a queer person, and I identify queer or gay, either one. Let me just go through for myself as an example. My gender identity is how I think about myself. I think of myself as a cisgendered man. My expression is more masculine, maybe slightly androgynous at times, but mostly masculine. My biological sex is also male, and my sexual orientation is homosexual. This is just me. But there are so many variations of where you can be on each of these different dimensions. And some of these things are things that you can see, and some of these things are things that you cannot see. And when we see and judge, we often make mistakes, which is why pronouns become really important. I use he, him pronouns. And I have other friends who have a gender expression. I have one of my really good friends identifies as a man, but his gender expression is a androgynous to female and feminine, and he uses he, him pronouns. He gets she, her pronouns all the time and has to say, nope, I use he, him pronouns. I just have a different gender expression. So this is where it gets complicated. Now, in the business context, this is also where it becomes important, because if you are seeing and judging, therefore you're saying like, oh, this person is masculine, or they present masculine, or they present feminine, but you don't know which their pronouns they prefer, you can make a mistake. So it's always good to ask. Just say, hey, I'm Josh, I use he, him pronouns. Tell me about you, or tell me what pronouns I should use. And that's okay. Every non-binary and trans person I know is happy to share their pronouns. I'm gonna pause here and just see like if there are any thoughts or questions on this so far.
Any thoughts, you guys? I do have a question for you, Josh. Could you explain
Yeah.
to us specifically what you mean by queer for you?
Oh, queer is a really fun one, because I think that it could mean something more towards the center of the spectrum. And I think that seems to be what works for other people. I also kind of use it as a umbrella term for anything in the LGBTQIA+ category, because acronyms are hard and not really fun to say, and queer is just a fun word to say. So I like queer. I also have a podcast that I'm recording with a friend of mine. Actually, it's Ender if you watch the the video. And they go by they, them pronouns. And we wanted to talk about user experience, but in a very broad perspective. And we're calling it Queer UX because they are happy with the word queer. I'm happy with the word queer. It kind of just works for both of us. So that's my personal opinion. But I'm sure you can have lots of other definitions of it.
Okay. Great, thank you.
I have a question. It's not really, it's kind of more about what you talked about at the beginning of
Yeah.
about like working cross international with people. Like, what's that process like for you? Like, how do you guys meet? Are there ever like any issues with that? Like, what's that like?
As an American in France, you mean? Or...
Oh no, like he said, like he had people that he was working with in
Brazil, and
like,
yeah.
like you guys are all on different time zones, and I'm sure there's like language barriers. Like, what's that process like?
Yeah, so I did. Yeah, so we have a standard working language of English, but that's actually, and there's another article that I sent about speaking English so non-native people understand. That actually came from interviewing and talking to the rest of my team that are non-native English speakers, as well as my experience being a non-native French speaker living in France. So definitely communication, I would say, is one of the key things to understand. And there's also a book, if you're interested in cross-cultural communication, called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. It's ERINMEYER. The book is called The Culture Map. And she's actually an American that teaches at a business school in France. But it's really, really fantastic when it comes to cross-cultural communication. And then, of course, there's all of the intricacies of having Zoom meetings, which is always fun, and not being in person, but then, trying to have those in-person moments as well. So yeah, it's a complex thing, but it's something that we started out as a remote company, and doing research remotely through COVID internationally, it's actually like very, very possible to do quite a lot.
Right.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any other question? No. Okay, you can move on. Thank you.
Gonna keep going.
Keep going.
So these are some questions to reflect on. And if I were doing an in-person workshop, I would have you actually just take time and answer them. And then we could have a discussion about it. Maybe you can do this later for fun if you want. But whenever we have a box that we put ourselves in, like, you are X, you are male, you are from this country, you speak this language, it creates a false binary. because we're saying it's this or that. And as my non-binary friends will be the first to say, it doesn't have to be a binary. And there are a lot of things in society that come up. Like my friend was telling me about how there was like a bin of socks, and it was like, these are male socks. And they had like blue, because blue is masculine. And then they had feminine socks, and like, they're just socks. They're all the same. Like, you can pick whatever color you want. Why do we have to gender the socks? Because these are the only colors that males can wear. I really should have worn a pink shirt today, because I just like am not making my point by wearing blue. I just happen to like the color blue, but it doesn't have to do with my gender expression or identity. I just happen to like blue. I also like the color orange, which you can't see in this, but I have other orange in my room. So as soon as you put someone in a box, it not only shuts down the conversation of exploring the complexity and the intersectionality and the diversity and the complexity of humans, because we are all complex and we all don't fit in all the boxes. So as an exercise, think about how you define yourself and how others define you. What are the boxes that you're okay with? I'm okay with queer as a box because it's a nice big box and there's lots of space in it for me. I'm totally happy with that. I'm also okay with gay because I am gay. I'm a male and I'm married to a male. And yes. So there's that. That's another okay box for me. But then if there's a box that says American, well, I'm technically still have a passport, but I've lived in France for 5 years. I'm not totally American culturally anymore. I'm not French yet either. And I will apply for citizenship here in France, but that doesn't mean that I'm suddenly, all of a sudden you get the passport and now I'm French. Well, technically, yes, I'm French, but at the same time, if that were to happen, I'm not really French either. And so it's about exploring the gray area in between these false binaries. Like, are you American? Yes, you have a passport, therefore you're American. Okay, but I'm not really. And so it's about these gray areas in between, because the false binary is less interesting than the gray area in between. And when you ask people questions like, how do you identify? There are so many different ways that you can identify that it invites exploration and sharing. And that's one of the things that you can do with other people to help learn about other people. So I'm going to move on to some mindset shifts because we already had some questions. And again, stop me if needed. So one of the words that is used in the user experience or UX community a lot is this idea of empathy. And empathy is this idea of walking in the shoes of someone else. And when you're designing products and you're trying to design for people that are not like you, it's a good idea to try to think about what that experience is like for these other people. And we use this word empathy, but really empathy is something that I can't have for some experiences. Being a cisgendered white male, I am not going to know what it is like to be Black, to be a female, to have a child. Like, I'm not going to know these things. And empathy isn't really the right word for that. But if I'm looking at trying to understand a marginalized population or group, I can use compassion. And compassion is this idea that I understand that I am different, and I also seek to understand what the experience is like for other people. And when I learn that that experience could be better, I can have compassion for these humans that are having this negative experience and see what I can do to help. That's what compassion is. Compassion is saying, this is something I can do to help. And it's this shift coming from apathy of like, I can't do anything. There's nothing I can do. It doesn't really matter, to accountability. Like, I can do something. I can do something to help this experience because of my role, because of my platform, because of my job responsibilities, whatever it is. in the future, we'll all have opportunities to do something to make life better for fellow humans. And accountability is saying, and compassion is saying, yes, I will do that. A growth mindset is something that has been talked about in the industry for the last several years. Carol Dweck is the author of the book about growth mindset. And growth mindset is coming from this idea opposed to fixed mindset. So a fixed mindset is, this is just who this person is. They cannot change. And you can use this with yourself. I'm just like this. I'm not going to change, but you can change if you want to. And a growth mindset would approach that differently and say, feedback is really important to learning what I could do better. And you can view efforts as essential to success. You could say, I'm going to work really hard, and that's going to be important. Persistence, embracing challenges. Like, this is going to be hard, and I don't know how to figure it out, but it's okay because I'm going to learn. And as we grow, as we learn, we're going to get criticism from people. And we're going to have to be okay with that because there are going to be ways to do things better. And I like to use, instead of good and bad, again, false binary, good and bad, I like to use effective. Because, and similarly with good versus evil, like that person was evil. Like you just put them in a box of like evil, and this is a person, like they're really complex, and maybe that person wasn't really evil. But if you look at it in terms of, here's what I did I get to the goal or not? If the goal was communicate effectively and the person misunderstood me, I was not effective in that goal of communication. So if they say like, hey, what you said was racist, and that's a thing that you know might come up for people, it's important to say, wow, that's really important to learn from. Maybe I should say something different in a different way, because if the goal was be effective and communicate an idea, you can judge that much easier than like who someone is as a person. Because when we start judging people like you are good, you are evil, you are racist, you are like, it gets really personal. And people don't like being criticized as a person. We criticize ideas. We honor the person. And this is an important aspect as we are growing and learning about others that are different from us. And it's important to approach with curiosity and openness. So whenever, and this works in like anything in life, you could say this works in business, this works in group projects with your classmates, this works in family discussions. When someone is doing something and you're like, ugh, this person did this thing, approach with a growth mindset would be, I wonder why they're acting this way. Or, hey, how are you doing today? I noticed blank. You can use this formula. I noticed blank, where it is a non-judgmental way of objectively saying, like, you said this thing. Tell me more about what you meant. It's about not jumping to the conclusion of you're racist, or you hate me, or you're evil and trying to sabotage my career. It's about saying, huh, I wonder what's going on for them. And the more that we can do this, the better we're going to have more effective communication, the better we're able to come together. And again, we're all moving towards belonging. We want to move towards togetherness and not separation. I already mentioned this one, so I'll just go quickly on feedback on ideas, not personal, not people. Instead of knowing answers, ask questions and listen. This is a really good communication strategy in general that aligns with a growth mindset. It's really easy if you're excited about something to tell other people what you think, but you're not actually sharing you're not learning anything from that other person. And a growth mindset approach, and similarly a open and kind of DEI approach to things, would be ask questions and listen. Let the other person share with you who they are. Let them share, and then you learn. And that's more important. And they'll ask you questions too, typically the same ones. So as you're getting to know someone, the more you can ask them questions and be genuinely curious about them and be genuinely curious about the answers, you're suddenly going to learn a lot more. I was doing research on it was a news product that we were building, and I had people from both sides of the political spectrum come in to evaluate some of the product that we were building. It was a news application. And typically in the US, it's a very divisive topic. And if you are in one political group, you probably don't like the other one. And when things come up for you, like there was a person that came in, I knew that they were from the other political group. And I thought like, oh, wow, this person is probably going to be XYZ. And you can probably fill in those blanks because we all have these stereotypes and assumptions that we make based on our cognitive biases of who other people are. And it's important that if something like that comes up for you, that you just set it aside. You notice it and say, oh, wow, that came up. All right, I thought this person was stupid. I'm going to set this one aside. And then I had to go in and interview this person. So what did I do? I set all the biases aside. I said, I'm going to be open to learning and let them share who they are and what they think and why they think about it. And guess what happened? They surprised me. And if you try this in your personal life, again, this works in your personal life, in your work life, your school life, whenever you have that assumption that you make about somebody, set it aside and just be open and say, I wonder if that's true. And it could be that it is true, but most of the time, and I would say all of the time for me, when I go in with assumptions, it's really easy to read into our assumptions who that other person is. But unfortunately, that just reinforces our cognitive biases and stereotypes. And these stereotypes are not helping us when we're actually trying to uncover who another person is, to learn about diversity, to learn about people that have different experiences in this world. Our lived experiences are our own, and everyone's is going to be different. How exciting is that we can learn about other people's experiences of being a human in this world? There's no right way to be a human. There are just a bunch of humans all trying to figure it out for themselves. That's exciting. And you will always be surprised. So a challenge for the group is the next time you have any kind of negative thought about another person, set it aside and move forward thinking, I wonder what I can learn from this person. I wonder why they think this way. And just be open to be surprised, because you will be surprised. This is getting into belonging, because as we are communicating with other humans, we have to live and exist with other humans. And it's about building bridges between us, metaphorically, and not wedges to divide each other apart. Because the more that we're in it together, the more we can figure out how to be this human thing that we all are. And part of this is allowing opposing views to coexist. And it's really hard because you want to say like, well, that person thinks different than me and they're dumb. And at the same time, they might have very valid reasons for thinking the way that they do. And that's important to explore, because the more that we can use questions and learning to understand other people, the more that we can actually connect with other people. There was one time I was in a religious conference that my friend was in. My friend was getting her a divinity degree to become a pastor. And she invited me, being the gay queer person that I am, to share with a whole bunch of people about my experience formerly in the church. And it was really interesting because I think for a lot of people, I was the first gay person that they'd really talked to, which sounds odd, but it still happens. And it's important because I was able to share my story and people had a different view of who I was afterwards. Now, yes, there are lots of things one can do after that, and that's where the interesting conversations can happen. But you don't have to agree to be able to have a conversation. And sometimes it's really interesting when you don't agree. It's a French culture thing that they're very into debate, and conversations in French are very interesting because people really like to intellectually contribute to something and criticize, and like it's their way of kind of like coming to the right conclusion. And it's not about convincing the other person, it's about explaining why you think something is true and sharing that experience. And you can have a really heated argument and then just go have dinner and people are fine. Or it could be in the middle of dinner and it's completely fine. It's a really interesting cultural nuance here. I'm going to move a little bit faster through some of these. See common ground. Yeah, I said that. And then let's move towards belonging. I'll pause and see if there are any other questions.
Do you guys have any questions?
Well, I can say Italians are like French. We love to debate. And then people think we're really mad at each other. And then, it's
Yes.
like, okay, let's go get something to drink together. So, yeah, I totally find it. Totally true.
I love it. I love it. And so my husband is Italian Brazilian, and he
Uh-oh.
his family's Italian, but he grew up in Brazil.
Okay.
And so it's hard for me to think about like, okay, is he Italian? Is he Brazilian? And then he lived in England for a while. So he's kind of like this mix of all of these things, but he definitely has the Italian genes of talking over other people very loudly, which happens as well.
Yeah, not that it ever happened to me, right, guys?
And it's great.
I know. I know. We also have, I don't know if it's the same in France, we have the Italian goodbyes that last about half an hour.
Oh, yes.
You have the same in
You have-
France?
Yes, you have to faire le bise, which is the side of the cheek kiss to
Right.
everybody before you go.
Exactly. And then you come up with other topics of conversation.
Yes, it's a long goodbye.
Yes. Very long goodbye. So, but, oh well. Any question? No? Okay. So I guess you can move on.
We'll move on. So moving towards belonging. And again, we're going to come back to this idea of ethics and the idea that we all have the right to technology that treats us equitably. Again, I'm coming from a product design and research background. So
Oh, they are product designers, so that's perfect.
okay. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Okay, good. Perfect. So starting with this idea that of equality and that technology should treat us equitably, we all want to feel included. And inclusion can move towards belonging, where we start actually feeling like we belong, where we have a community. And so part of the process can start with not excluding people. And it's a good question to use whenever you are designing anything, is who might be unintentionally excluded? Who's not represented in the room of people that are trying to build a product? If you have a whole room of cisgendered straight white men, you're going to build a different product than if you had a really diverse group of people with different backgrounds. And that's interesting. So as an exercise, what you can always do is if you're trying to build something, say, who might be excluded unintentionally? And then go get feedback from those people that are in those groups and see what they think. There's this idea of nothing about us without us, and it actually has come from the disabled community. And it's really important that as we are designing products and as we are just growing as humans, that we don't have ideas about other people without asking and talking to those other people. And in the product design space, it's that we're not designing products for people without talking to those exact type of people that we want to learn about. So if we want to understand how a person that is deaf or hard of hearing uses a product, we need to involve them in the process of research and co-design. Nothing about us without us. And this can work in all of the different angles of diversity. And it's also important to start looking at ethnocentricity. And as Americans, as English speakers, we are in a place of privilege in the world, especially in the business world. And it's very easy, and I've seen it many times with lots of American companies, being very imperialist, both about the use of English as a language and about the ways of things that are being done in the USA, copy pasted into another language, just assume that the other culture is exactly the same, and that by putting it in Portuguese, suddenly everybody in Brazil will use your app the same way as everyone in the USA, which is completely not true. Does it mean you have to develop an entirely new app from scratch for a specific market? Sometimes. Are you going to be able to learn something and adapt it to a foreign market to make it more valuable for them? Absolutely. Every single project we've ever done, we always learn something about how an international culture does something differently than they do in the USA. And as we start moving towards thinking globally, it means that we can start becoming an us. That there's different ways, different flavors, different languages of how to approach things. But the goal being, let's solve this problem. Maybe the problem is slightly differently in Brazil than it is in the USA. Maybe the problem doesn't exist at all. Maybe they have different problems that nobody is solving. But we can come together and try to build something that solves those problems. And if you're lucky enough to work on a product that solves problems for people all over the world, that's amazing. And I want to look slightly at equality, equity, and justice. And I think the image basically says it for me. Equality, we all get the same size ladder no matter where we are. Equity being, we both get to the top, even though we're starting in different places. And justice being like, let's look at the underlying systemic issues and build the ladder together. And I think that this metaphor works really nicely because in the previous examples of equality and equity, we're looking at different ladders for different people. But when it comes to justice, it's something that works for everybody. And I think that that's a beautiful way to look at how we can create a better and more justice-friendly humanity in the future. Equity is a way of being, a mindset, a practice. Equity is a verb. Racism and inequity, and therefore suffering, are products of design. They can be redesigned. And as we start moving from a place where we're acknowledging that systemic racism is an issue, we can start seeking common ground. We can start building bridges. We can start listening more. And it's not about us coming up with the ideas, but it's about creating the opportunity to be open to listening to people that are different, and in this case, specifically Black people, and also start moving to a place of systemic belonging. What would the world look like differently if belonging was built into every system of governments, of culture, of society, of religion? What if belonging was built into that instead of focusing on differences and things that divide us? What if we could start looking at things that cause us to think about each other as part of the same group? This idea of in-group, out-group is really a human thing that happens. We find people like us and we say, we're the cool kids. We're the band nerds. We're the chemistry nerds. It's fun to do sometimes because we all seek people that are like us to reinforce who we are, because we get this sense of who we are from the people that surround us. And yet you can find people that are completely different than you, that might be completely opposite of you, and find things that reinforce other aspects of who you are, that cause you to think about yourself in a new way. And that's exciting. As a parting thought, and then I'll take questions for the rest of the time that's needed, the journey is the destination. There's no like get there of all of a sudden everything is going to be great for everybody. And in terms of product design, it is most definitely a journey as well, because you're not going to suddenly get to a point where everything is inclusive, and it doesn't have to be, because it's about making small progress. It's about small steps, making progress, learning a little bit as you go, and keep learning, because people and culture are dynamic, which means that we are always changing. And something that we know to be true about how people use products, or about humans in general, that was true several years ago is not the same as it is now. As a very obvious example of that, the Zoom meeting that has taken over so many things has evolved significantly in its cultural role in education, in business, and society, and culture, and communication with family. All of a sudden, the tools got better because that thing that called COVID happened, and suddenly we all had to be stuck at home. Innovation comes from these moments of scarcity and these moments of restraint. And as you find the possibilities in the restraints, suddenly it opens new possibilities to the future. I think I'm going to end with that, and I can take questions for as long as you have questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's see if I can try to see if I can have a little bit of a glance of them. They're here. So now they're on the spot and they have to answer your questions.
Also, it's nice to see that there are humans out there. I've just been talking to a black screen.
Okay. Let's see. I see the camera gets them. Oh, okay.
I see the roof. There we go.
Here they are.
Excellent.
Yeah, here they are. All right. Questions, anyone?
Sure. I have a question.
Yeah, Sean.
So I guess I'm curious because I mean, like designing things, I would assume there are probably lots of times where inclusion doesn't matter, right? When you're talking to a particular group of people. So I'm curious on like what type of projects you typically work on. Like, are they mostly like applications, or are you like being involved in like business ethics or whatever, whatever?
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that sometimes there are differences. Like usability is a really interesting thing. And if you have a design that is usable in one country, it's more cross-cultural to have usability in another country. And that's just because a lot of the design systems that are being used, and because sometimes the companies are the same, we kind of cross-culturally learn like, oh, I click on the hamburger to get the menu, and now we all know what the hamburger is. And at other times, and even another more simple example of direct manipulation, I see a thing, I tap on it, and then I can do something with it. Like those are kind of things that maybe you don't necessarily need to do cross-culturally, because it doesn't take advantage of the kind of data that you're going to get from doing work internationally. But the interesting thing is that you don't necessarily know what you're going to learn, especially when it comes to maybe generative research. And if you're looking at adapting a product from one market to another, you're not necessarily going to know all of the cultural nuances that are going to come out. But by starting to talk to people in that other market, you're going to learn those things and then realize, oh, I have to do this differently. So as an example, one of the apps that I did research on when I was still at Microsoft was a sports app. And I did research on it in the USA, and then I did research on it in Brazil and China and Japan. Now, sports as a topic is incredibly different between these three countries. But let's just look at one more specific example of soccer in the USA or football in the rest of the world. In the USA, and this is a thing about the USA that has happened with sports, is that it has become a statistician's dream job, where all they do is create stats on things, and people know the stats and they talk about the stats, and this applies to all the sports. And in Brazil, when you look at it was like a soccer, football application in Brazil, and then you show them a bunch of stats, they were like, I don't care about this. Why is this here? What they care about is the story of the rivalry between the teams, or the gossip of one of the players that did something inappropriate, or the national team that had this person from this other state. And all of a sudden it's about the rivalry and the history and the story, not about the numbers. So for a sports app to be efficient, to work, to even get used in Brazil, it has to be about the story. And if you have all these stats, like, and nobody cares about them, maybe don't put them there, or maybe hide them behind something else. Does that start to answer your question?
Yeah, 100%, absolutely.
Perfect. Any other questions? So what was your biggest like cultural learning that you did since you moved to France?
About the French?
Yeah. Well, Europe in general, I guess, but
What
mainly.
about yourself?
Yeah.
I'll answer both. So the interesting thing that I've learned about the French is that there's kind of this social dance that they like to do, where if you want someone to do something, they're going to say no. The default answer is always no. And then you kind of like get a little angry and say like, oh, but can you please? And you're creating this tension so that the other person can come in and swoop in and save the day and do the thing that you wanted them to do. And then you thank them profusely. Thank you so much. This was so helpful. This has happened in so many innocuous ways all the time. And it works as like this kind of little microcosm of French culture. And every French person I told about this is like, oh yeah, you're right. And I didn't know this going into it. It's just kind of amusing to me now. One recent example was I was renewing my gym membership. And in the past 2 years that I had renewed my membership, I used my credit card and I said, I would like to renew my membership. And they said, okay. And they ran the card and there was no problem. All of a sudden, this time, I had to use my French bank account card. And I had not only, it had to be a bank account card, a debit card, not a credit card. And it had to be a French bank account because France likes to do France. And then they said that I needed to get a check. And if you were thinking anything along the lines of what I'm thinking, it was like, I haven't had a check. I can't remember the last time I wrote a check. I can't even remember the last time I had a check. Wait a minute, that was that thing we did in the 80s and also the 90s. But I can't remember the last time I had a check. And I was like, yeah, I don't have checks. And they're like, no, but you have to have a check. And I was like, no, they won't give me a check. I tried, they won't. Oh, but you need to do the check. Well, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm sorry, they won't give me a check. I'm sorry. And then they put it through anyway. And it's just this like little annoyance that's
Right.
kind of hilarious. I would say amusing. It's just amusing at this point. But when you see it, when you spot it, you're like, oh, okay. It's like, look, I don't have checks. Nope, they won't give it to me. I'm sorry. Thing that I learned about myself there are a lot of assumptions that we make, especially in things like restaurants, about punctuality and efficiency. Doesn't have to be a restaurants in general. Efficiency is just kind of like an American thing. Like, oh yeah, things should be efficient. And when it's not efficient, you're like, why is this taking so long? And my husband used to say to me, like, turn off your American brain.
Right.
Anytime it would be when I moved here, especially, it would be like, why is it taking so long to get the check? And now it's just like, eventually I'll ask for it, but you just plan for the whole evening. And you just know that you're going to be patient and you're going to ask for it. And sometimes you have to ask for it a couple times. And it's just that they're busy. And that's just the way that it works. And there are so many ways that France could be more efficient, but it's somewhat charming in its inefficiency.
That's true. That's true. I cannot even imagine how it would be like an American and a Brazilian, half Italian living in France. It seems like this humongous paradox.
Yes. Yes.
Three cultures.
It feels like that a lot of times. And it's okay.
Right.
You just kind of adapt. There's a French way of doing things. And if you know the rules, everything is going to be fine. You just let it go the way that they know it goes. Like you say bonjour when you go into any place, and then you're starting off right. The
Right.
problem is when you like don't say bonjour and someone is like, and then that's why. It's because there is a social norm that you say hello to everybody. And you
Right.
always do that, especially when you go into a store, when you go to a restaurant, with anything, you always say hello.
Huh. Yeah, not really like that in Italy. Don't look at you.
Different culture.
Right, right. No, it's interesting because Italy and France are so close, but they're also very, very different culturally.
Yep.
Beside the
Right.
hostility, but beside that, there is like a lot of really big differences, and we're like next to each other. So
Yeah.
it's definitely
Sure.
interesting. Yeah. Any other questions? Anything? Anything resonate?
Could be a question about anything else that you want me to talk about. It doesn't have to be about the presentation too. So whatever,
Right.
whatever you're curious about asking.
Right. Anything?
I guess just a comment.
Yeah.
Please.
Well, when thinking about accessibility, inclusion, all of these things, it's easy to, I guess, find reasons to not accommodate somebody or maybe exclude somebody because of something. That's really easy to do, but I think what I appreciate about what you've been talking about and the work that you do is that it's based off kindness. Like that's the root of it. It's just being nice. Like, why wouldn't you do that? So when you think about it that way, like, why not be inclusive? Why not try to accommodate for anybody else? And then all the other thoughts kind of just go away.
Right.
Yeah. And from a business perspective, it's often like, well, we're not going to make money. And so it doesn't matter. And it's kind of shitty, like, as a reason. And so a lot of my focus has been looking at how we can actually translate a focus on inclusive design to business results and growing your audience, because that means that business people can understand it. And yeah, they need the business justification to do it. But I feel like we all deep down have the moral imperative of be kind to each other.
Right.
And I think that that's like, we can start from that, and that's great. And I want to believe that all of us are in that place. But when it comes to making business decisions, then sometimes it needs a little bit more numbers behind it to make sense. And as for accessibility specifically, there are a lot of laws in the USA that impact accessibility, and that products have to be accessible, and you're actually fined if they're not. So there are imperatives as well that force it. But if you know nothing and you learn something and you're like, oh wow, there's so much more I can do here, it's a lot to sometimes it's a lot of work to do that. And like, I hear you, but at the same time, like, it's also like legal. And that's another reason that it sometimes has to happen. The problem is that it happens at the lowest level of like, yes, we did it. It is technically accessible, but like, could it be better sometimes? Yeah. And that's where you talk to people and you learn about, like, you watch them just do it and you're like, oh, that's really complicated. That's really hard. Like, what can I do to make this easier for you?
Right. Right. And interesting, because if you start from that point at the beginning, it doesn't really cost you more.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
Because you could just build it correctly the first way, the first time.
Right. If you do it right and you interview the right group of people, if you interview 100 people, it doesn't cost you more to interview, like, you know, a diverse group versus an homogeneous group. Is the same amount of money. So it really kind of a no-brainer in a way. It's like, it's not more expensive to do it, and it can reap a lot of benefits. So yeah, I'm very ethical as well. As like, I rarely talk about the ethical part of it, as in like, you're gonna make more money if you do this. So
yeah, there's also hold on, I had a related thought here that I think is important. Nope, I lost.
oh, oops.
Sorry.
I'll come back. You can always send it to me. So anybody else? Any other questions? No?
I do.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay, Robbie, go ahead.
You can see me, but
Okay, let me try to find that. Here it is.
how often do you find yourself debating on, like, with people on hard topics, or even just disagreeing?
Like in the regular life or in work life?
In both, actually.
Yeah. So how often do you find yourself like debating with somebody who have a different opinion
At work.
At work or?
I probably at least weekly with my husband. he likes that. There's an intellectual, like, challenge to it. Yeah, I mean, like, I would say, like, with random people, like, not often, but I mean, it's much easier to, like, have the debate when you're closer with someone, I think. So yeah, I think, and it also kind of depends on like what the topic is too, because there are some topics that you're like, yeah, I'm gonna like really fight for this, but other ones are kind of like, oh, that's interesting, you think differently. Tell me more about why. But it doesn't have to be a debate per se.
Right. Are they less divided in France, as in far compared to United States? So right now, you really cannot talk to anybody that thinks different than you, because it's going to be a war. So I'm wondering if in France they're a little bit more open, at least in politics. I mean, like all those like hot topics. Is it easier to have an exchange of opinion in France, do you think, than it is in United States, or no?
It's okay to it's more okay to disagree in France. Okay. In the sense that, like, it's okay to have a different view and people aren't going to, like, you know, not talk to you because you think differently. Like, it's more okay to disagree with someone, even just like in a like casual conversation. You can just disagree with someone and be like, I disagree. That's fine.
No, you don't get canceled for saying something different.
No, I haven't seen that.
What is that? Well, it's happening a lot right now with the Israel-Palestine war here in the US. So
it's a really difficult situation, and I know a lot of people personally impacted by it. So it's especially close being here. It's like, you know, it's a couple hours away, and like I said, I know people impacted by it. So it's like, it's a really tough one, and there's this kind of this idea of like idealism, and like the like ideal should be this thing over here, but then there's the reality. And when we conflate the two, I think that it causes a lot of problems, because if we're making decisions based on like, it should be this, like, yeah, it should be, but that's not the reality. The reality is this different situation. And it's really, really hard to make decisions based on some ideal that isn't reflective of like the lived experiences of people.
Right. Okay. Right. Any more questions? You guys all set? All right. Well, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it. You giving us the time. See, I'm still here. Giving us the time. Hi.
So it was really, really wonderful. So, and thank you for letting us record it so they can watch it again. And I turn on the subtitle as well. So if we miss anything, we can always go back and look at the subtitle.
Cool.
So thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here, and please reach out if you have any other questions.
Yes, for sure. Have a wonderful
Okay.
weekend, because
Thank
we're
you.
almost
You
there
as
for
well.
you, right?
Yes, right now.
All right. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.